If you can only afford to purchase one small light for your videos, which should you buy? A cheap softbox, a more professional light dome, or maybe one of these tiny pocket lights that everyone seems to have. If you're interested in lighting interview style shots, I'll be sharing some capabilities of this little Andycine RGB R1 light so you can decide whether something as tiny as a 5-inch light is best for your needs, especially when it comes to shooting a key light interview. I'll also be adding some diffusion to see if this light could potentially work as a key, and I'll be sharing with you some brightness comparisons alongside my newer SL60 to show you the output comparison. As a disclaimer, Andycine did send me this light for free without any expectation of a biased review, but moving forward, just take note that I didn't pay for this light, so being completely objective is kind of impossible. Anyways, if you're looking for color accuracy and other specs, I'll share them on the screen now, but for this video, I don't think it's that necessary to delve into some of the deeper technical specs, but there are a few specifics that are relevant to me, and those are battery life, build, and output. So battery life is important for obvious reasons. A light going out during a shoot is super embarrassing and pretty much unprofessional and requires you to usually reshoot an entire scene, or always requires you to reshoot an entire scene. For instance, our church was borrowing some older tungsten stage light from a ministry nearby. It was for our live stream, and that key light, a bulb, blew in midstream. The scene was fairly dark until I gaff taped my Falconize F7 to a light stand and let it go for the rest of the service. But the Falconize battery life is just shy of 2 hours, an hour and 51 minutes to be precise, so I wasn't worried at all. And because of the size, I always have it in my bag for situations just like this. Moral of the story, battery life and reliability and gaff tape will save you in a pinch. In regards to the R1, it claims 2 hours of runtime at full output. For my initial testing, after having it on its charger all night at 5600 Kelvin at 100% output, I got 1 hour, 48 minutes, and 33 seconds. So for my uses, it was under what was advised, but knowing that I can have a reliable output of light for an hour and 45 minutes is really convenient to have when you don't have a power supply available. So this could also be amazing for camping, emergency situations, and a myriad of other cases where you need a bright off-grid light. Anyways, in regards to the build quality, I don't have a lot of issues with the metal enclosure, but the buttons are certainly not the highest quality in the world, and with the dials and switches, they're definitely of a lesser quality. I like that it has a hard on-off switch instead of a long press, like the one on the Falconize F7, but that's just my preference. If I were to compare the R1 and the F7, the Falconize easily has the better build quality, but it's also more expensive. So in this case, you get what you pay for. Now lastly, output is one of the most important things to me because it allows you to take any size light, given it's bright enough, modify it, and use it as a key light for most of my uses. In my case, if this light is bright enough, lighting an interview with something that fits in my pocket could be incredibly useful in a pinch. But can it hold up to that task, or is it better used for other applications? I hope this will answer that for you. So there are a couple things in play when keying an interview. Obviously your camera settings, lens, light output, diffusions, bounce, and many other different variables. But for my interview shots, I'm focused on the camera settings, particularly ISO, lens aperture, and the output of light. So before I light this talking head interview style shoot, I need the camera lens. And in my case, it's the Panasonic GH5 with the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. With a focal reducer, my aperture becomes f1.2, letting in a stop more light than without that adapter. And that extra light is pretty self-explanatory. It makes the scene just a little bit brighter. But how does that actually help us when it comes to this light? Well, if you have a smaller light like the R1, your output isn't going to be the same as a higher end video light that's made to be modified and diffused. So being able to brighten the scene in camera first, even before setting up our light, will save us from having to bump up the ISO on the GH5 and adding unnecessary noise into the image. So I have my GH5 set to f1.2, ISO 200 and 1/50th of a second shutter. This gives me a bright, great starting point. Next, I'll set up my R1 and put a circular diffuser in front of it. This will effectively make the R1 a larger, soft source, which looks much more pleasing to the eye for interview shots. The only downside is that by making the source larger, you're making the output dimmer. For my situation, I was able to maintain very good exposure with the aperture at f1.2 and ISO at its native 200. If you have something like the kit lens or an f2.8 lens, you'll have to move up your ISO to compensate, thus adding more noise. For my GH5, it's okay if I'm pushing 3200, if I absolutely have to, and the G85 around 1600 is around as high as I like, and with the GH4, 800 is about as high as I'm comfortable. It's kind of the curse of micro four thirds, I suppose. But the moral of the story is invest in fast glass. So depending on those factors of ISO and aperture, this light could very well work with a limited setup. But contrast that to my newer SL60, which is made for this type of situation. At full output, I would be completely overexposed to f1.2 and ISO 200. My aperture would need to be close down to around 3.2 or 3.5 while maintaining a clean ISO 200. Of course, in this case, I used ND filters to compensate. So really, you could keep the f3.5 kit lens, buy a better light, and get a clean image without spending spending an arm and a leg on a lens or a body. Just something to keep in mind. But really the question we're trying to answer is whether this little light is worth it for interview style shoots. Are there better options out there? So if you're comparing it to a $300 setup like my newer SL60, then yeah, this little light with diffusion would be a great budget option. But in my opinion, there are better options for interview shoots. And before you think I'm saying this light isn't good for anything, there is one specific area where I really think it does shine. The better budget option for interviews, in my opinion, is really any cheap softbox kit over 100 watts. And I'll go ahead and link one in the description that's 135. Back about a year ago, I bought a cheaper, newer softbox with one of those high output bulbs. And that cheap lighting kit is really what got this whole entire channel rolling. And while the colors aren't going to be completely accurate, keep in mind that you're getting a really bright, soft source for very, very little money. And something that's brighter and softer versus smaller and more accurate will win in my book pretty much every single time. So for me, buying a cheap softbox kit makes so much more sense to me. And honestly, you look more professional using them than you would setting up a little light like the R1. So that's definitely a plus. But there is one place where a tiny light like this does do great, namely as a portable hair light or accent light. If you need to cast a nice rim or hair light at a different color temperature or completely different color, this little light is perfect for that application. You can also hide it inside lampshades, behind small objects, or as a background fill, like I used it for during one interview where I work. And the size of the R1 makes it so easy to bring anywhere. You can't really bring an SL60 and softbox everywhere, or at least it's really inconvenient, but you can bring this little guy. So if you need a nice background accent light, hair light, or emergency key light, the R1 would make a great addition to your bag. But really, if you're looking for your first light, I would skip this one and start with a cheap softbox and then use this as a fill or hair in the future. I hope this was helpful.